And now for an exploding interview. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Explorminate, and today I have with me Ben. How you doing, Ben?
Hey Drexy, I'm not bad. How are you, sir?
Not too bad. And today we have a special guest with us. We have LucidTactics. How you doing, Lucid?
Hey, I'm doing good, guys. How are y'all?
Not too bad. So I thought I'd bring Lucid on because he's pretty much the guy who taught me how to play Dominions. So just want to have a quick chat with him about Dominions and his YouTube channel.
Yeah, awesome. I don't think I've actually seen you guys in a game. What server? Do y'all play multiplayer?
I haven't for about year or so, but yeah, I used to play quite a lot. I basically got about 500 hours between both Dominions 4 and 5, and nice. I've probably played about 3 of those hours in single player, so it's mostly been multiplayer.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, with me, he's beating me there. I don't have quite that amount of time, but the last time that I played a multiplayer game was over on General Confusion's Discord, and he was running a game, and I played there, and I got knocked out within about 2 years, and I actually did quite well, believe it or not, for someone who hasn't played multiplayer that much. But the guys on that channel they're just like way better than me.
Yeah,
I got my ass kicked.
Yeah, no, it's a hard game to play casually in multiplayer. And it's weird because the single player is not nearly as good as multiplayer. So it's this game where multiplayer is amazing and single player is kind of meh. But to play multiplayer, it's like jumping off a cliff into an abyss.
It is. One thing I would say, though, is that for the most part, the community are quite helpful and friendly, to the point that they'll literally teach you. Like one of the games that I played, the first game, I had a guy who was literally just teaching me how to play it, and even though he was one of my opponents. So I actually found the community in general in Dominions is pretty cool. And to say that it's friendly is not to say that it's not fun, right? Because people,
right.
There's loads of memes going around. People are always posting memes, and there's a whole culture that develops around each game. It's and added to the sort of the incredible diplomacy that you get, it's a completely unique multiplayer situation. I've never ever played a game that's quite like Dominions 5. Hey, we should get you to introduce yourself, sir. How did you get into video gaming first? We like to ask everyone, what was the first game that you kind of played that you really kind of realized that you were hooked on this genre?
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess I played Civilization 1 a lot as a kid. My uncle was actually like an art developer for that game, which I don't think I knew at the time when I was playing it. But yeah, no, I played that a ton. And then I think I played Lords of Magic a lot as a kid. Trying to think what else. Those were probably like my first 2 that I spent a lot of time playing. And then, I don't know, I guess I've wasted way too much of my life playing Warcraft 3 and Dota. So those were the other ones that I'm not super proud of, but a lot of hours spent on Dota in all of its various forms.
I mean, that's a really competitive game, though. So, I mean, it's all relevant, isn't it, in going towards developing who you are as a gamer. I mean, I didn't play Dota. I didn't really like those MOBA type games. I sort of fell off RTS. Probably, I reckon after Warcraft 3. I really liked Warcraft 3. I thought it was an amazing game, like really, really good. And I played the original StarCraft a fair bit. What about you, Drex?
No, I've never really got into those. I kind of gave up RTS pretty early. I got sick of all the Command and Conquer versions that just came. Yeah, I had that period of time where I think Red Alert is the one I've played the most, and then they just flooded the market with too many of those. So yeah, I didn't really get into thing. I have played Dota, but yeah, normal RTS I haven't played for a very long time.
I think it was Dawn of War 2 that kind of killed RTS for me, thinking about it, because I really liked Dawn of War, and then Company of Heroes came out, and that was an amazing game as well. But they were kind of getting to the point where it was like, you had to it was just really stressful. And I'm like you, Lucid, I've been playing games since Civ 1, so that was the first 4X game I can remember playing.
Oh, nice.
And I was a teenager. I must have been 12, I think. Yeah, about 12 when Civ 1 came out. So I wasn't very old. And so, I mean, 4X games and RTS kind of developed in tandem with one another. And it seems to be a common thread amongst the 4X community that, you know, everybody who kind of played Civ was also playing stuff like, you know, Warcraft and Starcraft and, you know, Total Annihilation, etc. And then they kind of dropped off as they started getting older. And I think it's just as we start getting older, the stress of playing RTS kind of starts getting to you a little bit.
Like if you look at like StarCraft and stuff, competitive StarCraft, I mean, you know, it's a little bit being like a grandmaster in chess. Like who wants to be Bobby Fischer? You know, like to be that good at those games, like I mean, the micro and stuff, like you're having to click so often and you don't have any time to think about anything, you know, like it's, I think that the one way to think about it is for a game like Dota, like all the MOBAs, is they basically ask the question, what if inside an RTS, you could devote your full attention to microing one unit that had abilities? And like, if you think about it, RTSs like StarCraft and stuff, there's a lot of units with abilities. Like, what if you could micro every single unit in StarCraft? You know, like in some ways that's like the upper limit of play, but nobody can do that. So then you're like in this weird space where it's like the game is less about strategy. I mean, and there's a ton of strategy that still goes in it, and more about like how you can micro all your units.
I will make a disclaimer. I did actually play Dawn of War a whole lot, and Dawn of War 2, because I actually liked it more than the first one because just a lot less units to control. So it's just a lot easier for me. And I like the sort of RPG element of it as well. I thought that was actually really interesting way of doing an RTS.
Well, that might explain some of the reason why MOBAs are so popular. I mean, if it is that, you know, people kind of they can't really hope to aspire really to the kind of like that sort of South Korean level of StarCraft, you know, play. Whereas Dotas offer you the ability to be able to have that level of control, but over a smaller amount of units. I do see why Dawn of War 2 was popular. I actually quite enjoyed playing that with my brother. We played that co-op quite a bit, but I didn't really get into playing it myself. I still, I don't know, I kind of like the first Dawn of War, even though I just can't be bothered to play it anymore because it's just too intense.
Yeah, I've played both those. They're pretty good. I mean, that was definitely a direction Dawn of War 2 went, was making it less RTS and more RPG-like, kind of like a MOBA, but that's also kind of the direction Warcraft 3 went. And if you looked at like how Warcraft 3 was being developed, like during how they were selling it when they were developing it, it was going to be more party-like. And as it got closer to release, it became more RTS-like.
That's interesting. And I mean, that's cool as well because it really fits the fantasy theme, doesn't it? You know, to have a kind of more squad-based thing. And it's just interesting that Relic went that direction when they made Dawn of War 2 as well. But yeah, I'm kind of interested to know, when did you get into Dominions then? Like, which was the first Dominions that you played? Because I think me and Drexy probably started with 4, but I barely played 4. I've got to be honest. I'm a real noob.
Yeah, I started with 3, so I'm not that far behind y'all. But yeah, it was one of those things I don't even really remember how I started, but I saw it. I was like, oh, this sounds like a kind of cool game. And then I got it, and I think I started playing single player, and I was like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I like started reading a guide for it. And it's like when you're reading the guide, you're realizing like, oh, wow, this game's actually really cool. Like, what if I could do that stuff that was in the guide? And then you do it and you're like, oh man, like this is really strong. And then you start reading more guides and you want to play the other nations. That was how it was for me. So, well, I was just going to say a lot of Dominions for me, really all since I've been playing, which is almost like 10 years now, has been like thinking about like taking a nation or reading a guide or thinking about a nation, coming up with some strategy and just kind of like running that through in my head until I feel like I'm ready to play it. And then when I am, like, it's kind of cathartic to actually try stuff out. But that was how I started. Like, I started reading guides. Like, I would spend so much time reading a guide, you know, like, and really like processing it and absorbing it. And then once I did, I was like, oh man, I'm so stoked to play this nation. And then that was how I learned Dominions.
Funny, it was very similar for me, but it was actually watching your videos because you do a really interesting thing. You don't just jump into the game. You sort of do like the first episode, you'd go through like your what race you were going to pick and how you was going to make your god and stuff like that. And you'd go really in depth and explain why it is you're playing this race this way. And that's basically how I learned to play Dominions. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, for me it was I first came across Das Tactic, and I think that was kind of where I first came across Dad's Tactic was looking for. So I had Dominions 4, and I think I played about maybe 15 hours of it. So I remember playing thinking, this is great. I can see this is really deep. I don't really have the time or energy to play this right now. So I put it on the back burner. And then Dominions 5 came out probably about 6 months later. And I was like, man, I've not even played 4. But I kind of convinced myself to buy it for some reason. And I said, well, if I'm gonna buy this game, I need to play it. So I went online and looked for some videos, and Dad's Tactic was the first one I came across, and I think Daz's videos might even be linked from the game. I forget now.
Yeah. He did like the official kind of intro for the game or like tutorial.
That's right. Yeah, sure. Because I think he's in the manual even. And so I found Dad's Tactic, and then I watched his short video, and I was like, wow, that looks really cool. And in the video, he makes a rush god pretender basically, and he kind of almost finishes the game in the first few episodes. I think he might even be in one episode. I forget now, and I was like, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I remember he had a fire dragon.
That was it. Yeah, right. Okay. So and then he had this fire dragon, and I just thought, wow, this is cool. So there's multiple ways to play this clearly, because when I first played Dominions 4, I was kind of approaching it more like a slow, steady, kind of single, as you would if you were playing a single player 4X game on a kind of easy-ish mode, right? But Dad showed how you can play it in a completely different way, and I was like, okay, there's something to this game, man, because it's clearly really deep. And then just like you, I started reading the lore, and then I kind of got really excited about the lore of all the nations, and then that was it, man. It got its hooks in me.
Yeah, it's the lore is pretty cool for Dominions because it's. In some ways, they kind of take whatever they want, and that like there's the Lovecraft stuff with Relay and Atlantis, which are the like the cosmic horror kind of races. But most of the other stuff is mythology from other, like human history, which I think is really cool. There's not many many games I can think of that are like we're going to just completely riff on nations like human mythology and kind of pull out parts of it and make it cool.
Right, and I understand that one of the developers at least one of them is a historian. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. I think they're a professor. They teach history or something. Yeah. I actually don't really know the developers, which
you can tell, because I mean there's a huge amount of thought gone into it. Yeah. But they've also taken some creative license with it too, and you can see where they've also got a wicked sense of humor, and I think that shows probably a little bit more in Conquest of Elysium, I'd say, but it's still present in Dominions. And I mean, I don't know, just look at some of the pretender chassis. Some of those are just ridiculous. Like one's a giant demon parrot.
Yeah, that one's pretty funny.
It's so cool, man.
Some of it's cool. I mean, not to get too metaphysical, but I think a lot of times in fantasy, you get locked into like some trope, like it's like the Tolkien fantasy, right? Where we have elves and goblins and orcs and stuff. And that's efficient, like you say orc or goblin or elf and everybody knows what it is. Or we talk about gods and people think of like the Christian god, or like like we talk about mythology, people think of Greek mythology. But if you look at all human mythology, like it's super rich. You look at like African deities and stuff, and you probably have and I don't know where it came from, but I'm guessing there was some probably tribe somewhere that worshipped like a huge parrot or something. Some islander tribe. It's
all going to come from somewhere, and you know what? It's funny because we do have these kind of like high and low fantasy tropes, and Tolkien is the one that everyone kind of brings up, and yeah, it's clear that a lot of low fantasy stuff is kind of based around Tolkien. But Tolkien is, I mean, out of all the authors, he put more work into the background of his stories than anything. Like he literally went back through Norse mythology and other mythologies from around the world and recreated his own kind of mythology. I mean, there's stuff from a load of occult stuff in there. There's like stuff that's vaguely related to like the Kabbalah with the Valinor and the trees and the Tree of Light, and that's straight out of like Jewish mythology. And there's and from Norse mythology as well. So it's funny that people kind of missed the point with Tolkien, I think, and they kind of got sidetracked with with these elves and orcs and all that kind of stuff, when really the meat of it all is just as rich. I mean, it's almost as rich as genuine mythology. So that's
right. Yeah.
So let's take a step back. I just wanted to go through, how did you start with your YouTube channel, and did you start with Dominions videos?
Yeah, I did. So before I started Dominions, there were a few Dominions YouTubers. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but Psy was one of them. Nuclear Monkey was another one. And I think Colonial was another one. And there's probably like a couple more that had channels, but those were like the three that I watched. And I was kind of getting to by that time I'd probably been playing Dominions like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, 3 years probably. which is probably when you, depending on how fast you learn, it's probably like about how long it takes to really understand the game a bit. And it's probably, people probably understand faster now with YouTube. But I don't know. I decided, I think I started my channel with like a quad bless Airmore build because I don't know. It was some kind of weird build I had read about, but nobody had been talking about much. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put it up and we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, I thought there weren't a ton of YouTube creators that didn't publish very frequently for Dominions. And I thought I was like kind of getting to the point where I could add something to the community. Whereas before I'd just been like ravenously consuming stuff. So I think that was how I got into it.
Would you say that you kind of, you were saying you started with this kind of crazy quad bless Ermor build. Would you say that trying to innovate within the game's meta is one of the things that you do? Is that the way that you've kind of approached the game? Because I mean, from some of the series that I've watched you do, you often seem to go for some quite out there stuff.
Yeah, no, I think most of the stuff I do is off meta. Like, I don't think I've ever picked a pretender that was from like directly from a guide or anything like that. And that's not completely true. I've probably done it a couple times, but yeah, so it's normally like off meta a bit. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes. I think the inspiration for me and like the way I think about the game is like if you look at some of Balls' guides, he's one of like the more prolific Dominions guides writers, and he had kind of been absent from the community for a while, but he's back now. But he kind of falls in love with each nation when he writes a guide, and I mean, you can tell, and it's like. Every time you read a guide for one of the nations he's talking about, you're just like, oh my God, how did the developers make something so strong? Like, why is this allowed in the game? And if you don't understand your nation that way, like if you haven't thought about it enough so that you're like, oh my God, this is completely broken, then you're not, I don't know, then it's going to be hard to win like a high level multiplayer game with them. So, and if you can do that, I mean, I guess this is the thing is that like the innovation part is if, like Dominions is so complicated that by the time you understand what somebody else is saying about a nation, like if you read a guide for it or whatever, like by the time you really internalize it and understand it, you're going to realize they missed certain things, or you have it like you think there are other things that are more important. And so then you end up like coming up with a different building strategy.
I think that's interesting because it's clear that, say for example, there might be a way that you've approached a specific nation in one of your videos, and then I might go and watch someone else like General Confusion, who I also watch, and he might approach it in a different way, and both of those methods might be pretty valid, right? But because the game is so complex and there's just so many different nations within each age now, that what might work pretty well for one set of nations might struggle just against one. So it's just a ridiculously complex game, and it's amazing that the Illwinter have managed to create a framework within the game mechanics that do allow people just to constantly explore, within the toys that they've got to play with, so to speak. It's just, I don't think there is any other game that I can think of that has that level of that kind of sandbox nature, whilst also being, directed enough to be a good multiplayer game. Yeah,
I think that's completely true. And I think one of the things that enables that is the diplomacy in the game. Because if you were to have just like a 1v1, like a StarCraft game or something, that, if one nation can eke out a tiny advantage at the beginning, they can snowball that into an advantage to win them the game. And anytime, people do 1v1 blitzes and dominions, but those things are like knife fights, man. And like, you can't take, like if you want to have a shot at one of those, you have to have like some crazy strong bless on a crazy strong nation and just absolutely run at the enemy. I mean, with some tact, of course, but that's not how normal multiplayer games play out. Most normal multiplayer games, like people take much more greedy things than they would in a 1v1 blitz, where they're taking things that are going to take longer to pay off. And all that is, the only reason that's even allowed, like that's even part of the meta, is because of diplomacy. Because if you get too far ahead, everybody else is going to gang up on you early. So you actually don't want to get super duper big at the beginning. Otherwise, it's going to be like a 5v1.
Yeah, that was like probably the most interesting thing I found about Dominions was the diplomacy, and also that the majority of players also role play their race as well, which was also pretty interesting, which I've not seen before in many multiplayer games. So do you feel that diplomacy is actually the most... All right, you need a good build, but do you think diplomacy is actually more important than just being really good mechanically at the game?
I think it depends. I mean, I think diplomacy will give you opportunities, but to turn any opportunity into a win, you need to have a very strong understanding of the game and how it works. Because, like, there's the board game diplomacy, which is very similar to how diplomacy in Dominions works. Are y'all familiar with the board game at all?
I've not played it, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, same with me.
Right. So the main difference between Dominions and diplomacy in terms of how the diplomacy works is in diplomacy, the board game, it's a zero-sum game. So if you attack somebody, you're going to trade armies with them at a certain rate. In Dominions, if you're a really good general, like you have the right army composition and your units are scripted really well, you can completely wipe an entire enemy army without losing anything that costs twice as much as yours did. So in that sense, if you are not at least pretty good with the combat system, it doesn't matter how good your diplomacy is. But that being said, in a game where everybody's good with the is basically competent at least with the battle system, diplomacy is a huge factor because being on the right side of a 2v1 makes a huge difference.
In the very first Dominions 5 game that I played multiplayer, it was the late age, and I picked Jomon. Now, I didn't realize at the time that Jomon were just a bad faction, at least at that point. And I picked one of the worst factions for myself for a first game. But because I was I really got into the diplomacy side, and I was quite canny, and I kind of talked to all of the players around me. I actually lasted quite a long time. I had Gath as a neighbor, and this guy was like I kind of got him on side, and he was sort of helping me out, and then I sort of backstabbed him later on. And I also made an alliance with what's the Ermor nation, Lemuria. So even though everybody else was planning to attack him, and because I made that alliance, and it was a secret thing, I promised that I was going to be the guy who would attack him first, because they were all like, let's kill Jomon off by attacking Lemuria, 2 birds 1 stone. But because I didn't and I delayed it, it really got Lemuria to the point where he was really powerful, and it threw a massive spanner in the works. Now I don't know I'm going to say this, I don't know any other game that you can do that with. The mechanics of Dominions with the heavy focus on diplomacy really allow you to drastically change the sort of weighted odds of a game, because it doesn't matter how good or bad a faction is. If you can be a little bit canny in diplomacy, you can kind of stack the odds in your favor a little bit more.
Yeah, and diplomacy makes some weird things happen. Like you were saying, sometimes it can be good to keep a nation like Lemuria, which is this horrible cancer plague upon the world, alive, because while everybody's focused on them, they're not focused on you. And I know Perun, I don't know if you've seen his channel, but he had a Nazca game he won basically just doing that. He had everybody worried about Airmore, which was, some scary nation. And while they were all busy dealing with him, or with Airmore, he was busy eating everybody.
Yeah, it's just classic Sun Tzu, isn't it? And you can, like you say, you can just really go to town on that in this game.
And the amazing thing about it is there's no system. Like the diplomacy in Dominions is nothing. There's nothing in the game. It's all stuff players make up.
One of the most common complaints that we see about 4X games particularly, but kind of strategy game, PC strategy gaming in general, is one is bad AI, but that's a slightly different topic. It's related. And the other thing is diplomacy is never very good in 4X games, really. I think the one of the earliest examples would have been Master of Orion, and that got it right, actually, because the game mechanics were very tightly woven around the diplomacy in that. But 4X games tried to take this kind of single player against the AI diplomacy thing and really flesh it out. And it just became a way that, for you to kind of cheese the AI and just kind of put off an inevitable war until you're ready to win it. And whereas with multiplayer, diplomacy is just a completely different ballgame. It's something that is not only necessary, but it's half the fun. Like, honestly, I loved learning the mechanics of Dominions. I'm not a particularly good player, but I can get into that because as a gamer, as somebody who likes learning systems, I really enjoyed that. But learning the diplomacy, and each game is different as well, because you've just got different people, you've got different humans on the end.
Right.
It's just such added to the incredible mechanics of Dominions, it really creates a knockout punch of a game.
Yeah, I think you can learn things about real life from diplomacy in Dominions. Like I don't know. Like I'm in this big game right now which I shouldn't be in because it's going to be horrible. But it started with like 60 players, so the map is enormous, and it's all the ages combined. So like early, middle, and late. And But what's interesting is the first phase the game goes through is like nation state formation, where everybody's having their first wars, but coming out of that, all the whoever won their first war starts eating up all the small neighbors. And I'm pretty sure that's the way this is. I'm not very far in the game yet, but I'm pretty sure that's the way it's going to continue, where basically, unless you have some like very strong alliance between several small players, there's like an equilibrium that will get reached. And basically, if you're a small nation, you can't survive in a world with big nations because they'll just eat you, so that they'll be better set up to protect themselves from other big nations. And like, I think that's actually kind of insightful for how like human civilization works. Like, why is it there aren't many city-states left in the world? Well, the answer is because somebody running a small nation was like, if we annex this city-state, we'll be able to defend ourselves better against other nations. But that's all diplomacy, really. Like, people look around, they're like, if we got to survive, we're going to have to be big enough. And if you're a small city-state near a medium-sized nation, they're going to be like swallowing you whole.
Yeah, I think the only other I have thought of another game that I played that's very similar was Neptune's Pride. I don't know if you've played that, where mechanically, of course, it's very basic, but when it comes to diplomacy, that's almost the main part of that game, because you can take on someone who's weak under your wing and almost convince them to take second place in the game if they help you out against the other strong player. So yeah, it's really interesting that there's not that many games that really go deep into this. I guess being played by email helps, I guess, but it seems there's very few Forex games that a lot of people play multiplayer, and I found that Dominions is like probably one of the best.
Well, it's interesting, even in like real-time strategy games where they have like a free-for-all format, which is basically what Dominions is a big free-for-all, you don't see complicated diplomacy coming out of those, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's people need enough time to be able to like make cases and argue, and in a real-time strategy game, you don't have that time. But it should be that anytime you have a free-for-all, you should have really complicated diplomacy if there's humans playing against each other.
Do you think part of the reason why it works in Dominions is that there really can be only one winner, unless you're playing a Disciples game, but even then it kind of, there's only really one victory condition, and that is crush your enemies. Or, well, I guess you can find the thrones, but it kind of usually boils down to the same thing, I guess, in multiplayer. Do you think that kind of singular focus on this kind of Highlander thing of there can be only one, do you think that is what drives this frantic, complex and convoluted diplomacy that goes on in the game?
Yeah, I think that's a big factor. And that's one of the ways it's different than real life, is that in real life, nations don't have to conquer each other. They can just trade and be peaceful allies. But there's no city-states hardly left in the world, so there is some power dynamic in real life, which is you need to be big enough to survive against your neighbors. Otherwise, in 10 or 20 years, when somebody bad comes to power, they're going to eat you. And I don't, like, if you were to take that mechanic out of Dominions, where there could be multiple winners, and maybe that's what it is with it, because the game I've been thinking of in the back of my head while we've been talking about this is Civ 5. Because Civ 5 is another slower paced strategy game where if there's tournaments and stuff where there's a big free-for-all game, and there will be lots of, and it's got like a leaderboard with ranks and stuff, and there will be some diplomacy. People kind of want to go after the top dog. But I feel like with Civ 5, there's so many different victory conditions, and people all have their own little path they're working on, that they can kind of sort of ignore each other. That like you can kind of play in your own sandbox a little bit. Whereas in Dominions, any power you get is kind of going to have to come at the, from taking other people's stuff. So like forces you to interact more. So I don't know. I guess the way that I would think about answering that is if you have a game where, like Civ 5, where you're kind of allowed to play in your sandbox a lot, then the diplomacy probably gets a lot simpler. But in a game like Dominions 5, where and it's this kind of Highlander thing, there can be only one, where there's that kind of mechanic, it's going to force a lot of interaction, and how people are, how people are teaming up or who's fighting who is going to matter a huge amount. And then you get really interesting diplomacy.
This is, I guess, we've probably answered some of this question already, but Explorminate, we do have some Dominions fans, right? But it's probably one of the more niche games, I'd say, amongst the community. I think most people sort of gravitate to kind of more mainstream games, I guess, like Civilization, and the Master of Orion, like, you know, Space 4X games. If you were going to sell this game to, you know, to somebody, what would you describe it as being its main selling points, and why it is that, you know, somebody might want to get into it?
I think, you know, if you compare it to like a game like chess, right? Chess is reasonably simple. The moves are kind of simple. You know, you have different pieces. They can all do a few different things. But the way in which you deploy those moves is really complicated. You know, like, and you're having to think like 10 turns ahead. So there's complication in the movement, but the knowledge base of the game in some ways is kind of simple. Dominions is not like that. Dominions is like the complete other end of the spectrum, where there's a huge amount of knowledge in the game. So like, I think there's 10,000 units or more. There's like 1,000 items. There's like 1,000 spells. And the spells aren't like slightly different or like marginal improvements. You know, like one single spell you cast can completely change a battle. So it is this game where the knowledge factor, like just understanding this huge complicated world, can make a huge difference. Which I think is I think it's kind of the blessing and the curse of the game, because you can get your feet wet in the game without knowing most of it. Like if you read a guide and you know, there's probably, with a lot of nations, there's only maybe 30 or 40 units you need to understand, and maybe like 10 or 20 spells out of the whole 10,000. So you can kind of get your feet wet. But like in terms of how deep the pool is or what kind of game it is, it's a game that has like just a tremendous, unbelievable amount of depth in terms of the knowledge side. Like, what are all the things units can do? What are all the things you can do as a player? And because of that, the meta for the game, the community doesn't really know. We've probably got, I think we have about 1,000 active multiplayer players in the community. So it's a pretty big multiplayer scene. And there's a lot of good players. There's a lot of players who are better than me. But even amongst those, like, people are innovating all the time. And like, there's nations people think are horrible, and then somebody comes up with something and it's like, oh my God, it's really strong. So, and I think a lot of that's enabled because of this knowledge factor, where it's not just about, you know, thinking 10 moves ahead with the chessboard, you know, like it's so much more complicated. So if you look at a lot of other games, they have well-established metas where if you don't, like, you just read the meta and you do the meta and you know the meta. And if you don't, then you're an idiot. You know, people are like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. I think the coolest part about Dominions is that it's this wildly complicated thing that nobody knows what the meta is, and they probably never will. So you can just do whatever, you know, like you can figure your own stuff out and do what you want.
Yeah, I mean, for me, even though I've got 400 hours between Dominions 4 and 5, I still feel like I'm a total noob at the game. But that said, every game I've played of it, I've actually had a lot of fun playing it. So it's really weird. I think the main thing, it probably scares people, and people just need to get past that. And even if you're not doing well, you can have a lot of fun, and you can also help better players fuck over someone else, which is probably says more about me than anything else.
No, I also take great pleasure in that too. Everybody likes to kick someone in the balls when they're at the top of the tree. I think. Is it fair to say that one of the things that people might initially, one of the qualities of the game that might initially be off-putting is the really simplistic presentation and the simplistic graphics? Do you think that's fair? Because, I mean, I when I first looked at it, I was like, I just loved it. I was like, man, that looks awesome. But that's because I've got a bit of an old school sort of grognard streak in me that kind of likes stuff like that. But do you think it's fair to say that might be initially one of the things that puts people off the game?
Yeah, I do. I think a lot of people, they buy a game based on the Steam page. I don't think that's a controversial statement. And it's one of the things I kind of wanted to do was to like make a proper trailer video for the game, you know, where it like actually looks cool. Because in my opinion, the parts of the game that are awesome are the combat. Like the combat system in the game not only is mechanically amazing, but I think it's actually kind of beautiful. You know, like, it's, you know, it's not like a modern AAA game, but I think it's pretty good looking. You know, huge, you know, balls of mages doing huge evocations and stuff and battlefield wide spells. It looks pretty good. the part of the game that I think looks horrible is like the default map generator with the maps it makes. Like the random maps are horrible looking. They're like burn your eyes out.
Sure.
And that's what you spend like 90% of the game on. But there's like community made maps, which are beautiful. So I think like just if the developers for the next game, like, because they're working on 6 or whatever, the Steam page needs to only have custom made, like hand drawn maps, and they need a better trailer. Because I think the Steam page shows off the least attractive parts of the game visually. And I think there are off-putting parts, but I mean, and tell me if you disagree, but I think the battle part looks kind of cool.
I love the battles. I think it looks great. I think Drexy wants to make a point, but just before he does, I think that one of the big appeals or the main draw, I think, of Dominions for the developer with regards to the way that they've set the graphics up is that just like with a roguelike, because they don't have to create complex art assets, there's only 2 frames of animation for each unit. They can just add stuff relatively quickly. And if you actually look at that artwork and considering how much of it there is, it's actually really good. Considering, I'm pretty sure that they do the art themselves. I might be wrong there, but I think they do.
Yeah, I think they do.
They do, and actually, if you look at the quality of the art, it's absolutely excellent within the low fidelity that they've chosen. So, to say that the art, I've seen people say that the graphics suck, and I completely disagree. They do not suck. The custom maps the generated maps you're talking about, yes, absolutely, they could be better, but that's easily fixed, right? But the actual battle map graphics, they are really, really cool. And when you see an epic battle with hundreds and hundreds of units and skelly spam going off everywhere, and gifts from heaven coming down and all these crazy spells going off, I think it's super exciting.
There's nothing like it. There's honestly nothing like it. Like there's no other game that you can have 10,000 units fighting 10,000 other units in real time with like huge. I mean, you'll have one unit that's killing like 400 units at a time with like an enormous spell and like meteors raining from heaven and stuff. I don't think there's anything like it in terms of the battle. I mean, it's not AAA, but I don't know. Some of it I think you don't see as a new player. Because like if you're a new player and you just start the game and all you saw was the Steam page, you don't really see that much of the cool battles. You see the bad maps maybe. Maybe you start your first game and you play on one of the bad maps. And then like when you're doing expansion, you're expanding with like the first 10 turns of the game, you're expanding with like not very cool looking units, like 10 of them. And it's not, there's nothing epic about it. But in like 10 or 20 turns, you're going to have, like some huge frost giant that's literally killing entire enemy armies and, mages dropping huge evocations and stuff. So,
yeah, I think the combat is what I saw a video of the combat. I was like, wow, this looks amazing. I think it was someone playing Irma as well, just doing crazy skelly spam, and suddenly the screen's just filled with so many units. It's like, holy shit, I've never seen anything on this scale. Talking of the combat, the other thing that taught me a lot about the game was actually the combat log is awesome. It's absolutely awesome. You can actually learn from other players by watching the combat log to see what they're doing, especially if you just put a scout in an area and watch someone else's battle even, and you can sort of work out what they're doing, and you can sort of like try and work out how to counter that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm notorious for never building scouts, but if I were to ever build them, I would have a much better idea of what all the people I'm playing with are doing.
I think it just the combat log as well. If you've not bothered to read the manual, it will start showing you just how complex the game mechanics are under the surface. Like every single unit, when it attacks, it has to make it to hit roll. It then has to get through the armor. There's a chance for a shield to block. There's all sorts of like dice rolls that are going on with every single unit that attacks. So, and all of those are meticulously modeled. So I sometimes just stop the battles and I'll click on a guy and I'll just be like, I wonder what this guy's been doing. And then you'll see exactly who he's been attacking. And you can see every single 2 hit roll. The game just models absolutely everything. It seems to abstract very much at all. And within, if you're the sort of person who really enjoys looking at the fine details of things, we're buddies with Daz Tactic, and I know he's very, very keen on this kind of play. When I've watched his Let's Plays, he often loves to go into the statistics screen of these things and just pick out who's doing what, and You know, like how much damage did that spell do and that kind of stuff. And I think if you've got a mind for that kind of fun, you'll love it.
Yeah, I mean, you can go as deep into it as you want to. I mean, and there's people in the community who have just such intense game knowledge about how weird little miscellaneous things are calculated. I mean, and there's so many small things about, you know, exactly how this roll gets calculated and stuff. It would blow your mind. It would absolutely blow your mind. Fortunately, you don't need to know most of that. But I guess while we're talking about unit stats and stuff, there's one other interesting thing about the game, which is a lot of games have gone away from like hard counters. Like, it's actually one of the things I don't like about a lot of strategy games is there's like a rock, paper, scissors system where it's like bonus versus archers or bonus versus, infantry or something.
Sure, like Total War's gone that direction, hasn't it?
Right. And they have like pretty similar stats as units, but then they have, like some bonus for some, versus some other unit type. And that's, to me, that's like, it's really boring. And with Dominions, and the other thing is there's not many, I guess Total War kind of has it, but very rarely do you have a unit that's just like basically completely immune to another unit. Like in Civilization, there's nothing really like that. Like, I mean, if you have a unit that's totally immune to another unit, it's, from like 6 tech eras ahead of where you are.
Sure. This is an issue with balance, isn't it, I think? Because there's a drive with the sort of growing multiplayer community input. There's a drive for games to be balanced, and balance does not work in single-player games. And I think Dominions would be a much worse game if they tried to balance all the factions. I think that would just ruin it completely.
Oh, right. Yeah. And I think that, and it gets back to the diplomacy too, because you can have an unbalanced game if you have diplomacy to make up for it. But the way the units in Dominions are is like you can literally have one unit that can kill like a 10,000 person army. And I mean, there's no other strategy game I can think of where you can have one unit hard counter things so hard where you have something like that happen,
Yep. It's probably the only game I know where you'll get units like Anakites or something where they're just so notoriously feared that even starting next to a nation that can pump out this particular type of unit will instantly cause people to be scrambling in diplomacy to try and figure out who's going to deal with this. Like the threat of Ermor,
right?
That kind of stuff. There really is.
Everybody desperately wants them to be killed, but nobody wants to do it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think that's a problem with modern games. Really, is where they sort of overstrive for this balance thing when the truth is, overpowered shit is just fun, man. It's just so much fun.
Well, if you look at like a lot of the classics people love, like people loved Heroes of Might and Magic 3. They loved it, and they hate like Heroes of Might and Magic 6 and stuff. But like Heroes of Might and Magic 3 was one of the least balanced, like most gimmicky games ever made.
Yeah, it's broken as all hell.
It was horrible. I mean, it was horrible. But it was broken enough that most nations had at least one broken mechanic you could abuse. So the multiplayer games for them, and I never played it a ton, but multiplayer games were like, who can abuse their mechanic the hardest? Dominions is sort of like that, in that there's a lot of really, really strong mechanics, but there's a ton of them. And there's almost everything that you can do that's going to hard counter something else. There's something else which most nations can do that will hard counter that. So it's a different view of balance. Like I think, like you were saying, like a lot of the problem is like people just want to homogenize stuff to like make it more balanced or to do some like very simple rock, paper, scissors thing. And the way Dominions approaches it is let's throw in like a ton of crazy, like really powerful mechanics and give people varying access to different parts of it. And then let them just go hog wild trying to fight each other. And you end up getting this like really, really complicated like combat system that for most things, it does not play. Like, even though there's really powerful stuff and there's really hard counters, most of the time, most nations can be like an experienced player will beat the crap out of a significantly less experienced player, no matter what nation they have.
I think Dominions is a game that it's undeniable that you can actually do things in that no other game even come close to. Like, for example, you can kind of sneak spies into your enemy's capital and poison the water supply with some kind of disease-causing poisoning item, or teleporting your monolith pretender god under the sea in order to take a sea province. And the sheer range of madness that you can get up to in Dominions is just second to none. I remember, I think the thing that actually first got me really, really hooked into Dominions was I was playing MA Ermor, and I first cast Burden of Time. So I'd read about this spell, and I was like, that is absolutely fucked up, man. Like, what a really disturbing, like, kind of thing to do. And so I played this single player game, and I kind of fumbled my way through the game, and then I cast this Burden of Time, and I won, as you do, because you're gonna win if you cast that spell.
Right.
And everybody just sort of quickly starts rapidly aging, and then they just can't fight you because they've got no troops left, and your undead hordes march their way to the thrones, and that's it. What do you have a kind of favorite sort of Dominions moment, or do you have any very memorable Dominions moments where you had something, where you were able to use one of these crazy mechanics or crazy situations?
There are a few, but one of the funnier mechanics in Dominions, there's an ability, and it's on very, very few units, and it's called Innate Caster. And what it means as an ability is that this unit is so in touch with magic that the normal rules of casting a spell don't really apply to them. So like normally if you're going to cast a really powerful spell in combat, it'll take like 4 rounds of combat. And the significance of that is the enemy can put up a bunch of protective stuff in those first 4 rounds so that they don't really get walloped by the spell you're casting. But Innate Caster makes it so that you get to put things up. Basically, every combat spell is going to take no more than 1 turn to put up. And if you have a very powerful Innate Caster, meaning they have like a higher level of Innate Caster than 1, they can actually cast a spell that would normally take multiple rounds of combat to put up before the first round even starts, like potentially even like halfway through the first round. And you're like, okay. Well, what this means is you can kind of string together, like these units are so rare and so hard to get. A lot of times the only way to get it is to have it as your pretender god. The other way to get it is to wish for one, which is like a very in-game spell that costs 100 pearls, which is just an enormous amount. It's so expensive to wish for one of these, but you can wish for one of these innate casters. And then if you pair it up with an army of communion slaves, that will basically, communions are this thing in Dominions where a bunch of mages join their power to have one super powerful caster. You get this ultra powerful caster with innate caster. And you can use that to, before combat even really starts, steal like 60% of the enemy army. And there's almost nothing you can do about it. But it's amazing because it's so hard to pull off. You can only do it way at the end of the game. There are some very peculiar ways to counter it, but if you actually pull it off, it feels so good because the enemy would have spent like turns and hours scripting this army, or not maybe hours, but 30 minutes scripting this army. It's tons of income and gems and stuff they put into it, and they're over there fussing about every little detail. And they're thinking they're going to have a normal combat, and then you come in and just steal half of it in the first turn before they can even do anything. So satisfying.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah, that's the thing with that game. It's just so many. There's just so much depth to it, and so many strange things that can just happen in the game. Where even if you lose to it, you just gotta laugh.
Yeah. If you lose to that, it's just like, okay, it's not my fault. There's nothing I could have done there.
Yeah. So, if you were going to advise someone who wanted to get into the Dominions, what would be like, say, the top 5 things you would recommend they do, apart from watching your videos, to actually learn the game?
Well, my videos actually aren't really that great for new players. I actually just made one. I haven't put it up on the channel yet, but I made one where I'm playing these big frost giants, and I at least try to target it towards like a new player. It's a single player game, but I would like if I just bought the game, I was a new player, I would probably read up on the lore of the nations, figure out like a cool one that I liked, and then I'd go play it in single player on easy mode and try to actually win the game with them, which, I'd read a guide on them, see basically how it works. You won't really understand a guide if it's your first time playing, but you'll see a few things you should probably do, like what units you should recruit. Go play a single player game on easy, see how you do. And then after that, I would probably find one of these multiplayer communities. Most of them are on Discord, and you just sign up for a game. I'd recommend signing up for a Disciples game, which is like where you have a team member, and you want to sign up for like a new player game. So like a Disciples new player game. There's a particular server called the Immersion server, which is just for new players. And it's pretty good. They have a lot of people you can ask questions to. But that's like a great way to learn the game because a lot of the misery loves company, right? So when you're getting knifed in diplomacy, you're getting backstabbed. It's always nice when you have a partner that's getting backstabbed with you. So that'd be my advice. Pick a nation you like, play them in single player once, and then pick them in a multiplayer game in a Disciples mode.
Would you say it's fair then afterwards, once you've played a few games, that then you can go dive into the reams of YouTube videos where people have done more sort of in-depth nation analysis and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, totally watch like whatever nation you think is cool. Like, so figure out what nation you think is cool. Totally watch one or two of the videos on that nation on YouTube. Most of the nations and dominions will have one video on YouTube about them at least. And yeah, do that before you watch the single player. But I mean, I think the thing that's it's always hard once you've been playing a game so long to like know when you're speaking in lingo and know when you're not. So like my videos are targeted to like intermediate plus players, like people. I'm not explaining all the lingo as I go through it. But once you've played your first multiplayer game, then I think my videos would like make a lot more sense to people.
So basically, I did it backwards. I've hardly played single player, and I watched your videos to learn how to play the game.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, if you watch, I don't know. I mean, it could work. Like if I don't play StarCraft, but I watch StarCraft videos. I don't know why, but I feel like I kind of understand some of the fundamental kind of mechanics of the game now, even though I don't really play it.
I think just what you do good, when you're doing your sort of setup episodes, you do actually say why it is you're picking this sort of bless or whatever. So I think you should give yourself a little bit more credit, actually.
Okay. I've heard it before that I've brought people into the game. They hadn't heard of it and they started watching my channel and then they started playing. So maybe there's something there. But I do think, though, I went and recorded this a few weeks ago, this game with Niflheim, which is this Frost nation. I do think I need a video on the channel for new players. Yeah, the other thing is don't stay in single player too long. I think what you did was actually really good. Getting out of single player, getting in a multiplayer lobby, playing some games. It's fun. It's fun. And you'll lose horribly your first time, but who cares?
It'll be fun even if you lose, like Drex said. And I mean, I still play single player. I quite like playing single player, even though you will eventually run up against the limitations of the AI, and no matter how good they make it, it's never going to kind of simulate that thing that you get with multiplayer. The thing about single player is, though, that multiplayer does take a long time to play. I think it's fair to say that if you commit to a multiplayer game in Dominions, you are usually committing for a couple of months at least.
Yeah, most of the time. People do blitzes, which are normally it's like a 4-hour segment, which is kind of, it's like how people play Civilization a lot of times in multiplayer. A group of guys sits down for 4 or 5 hours together and they play around. So we have that same thing for Dominions if you want to do it that way. And those games are probably a little less frequent than the long form kind of one turn a day thing. Most of Dominions is that long form type. It's one turn a day for probably like 2 or 3 months. And at the beginning, the turns are quick. They'll probably take you 5 or 10 minutes. Towards the end, they'll take you at least 30 minutes a day. So that's not for everybody. But if that's not for you, you can do blitzes.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest barrier to entry is just how long the games take and how much commitment you need. But I did find with Blitz is that because there's basically a time, the way Blitz works is you've got a time limit on how long you take your turn. So especially if you're a new player, it's just super stressful. But I did find what I loved about playing play by email is that you actually can spend quite a lot of time just thinking about your turn and planning your turn and sort of working out all your strategy and stuff.
Oh yeah, you'll sit there and think it. Like it's not just when I'm playing the game. I'm sitting there like before I'm going to bed thinking about, oh, that bastard's going to attack me in this province. I better move something there.
I used to spend like maybe an hour before I even made my turn, just kind of drawing up my battle plans and who I was going to talk to and what I was going to try and get them to do. And it's just I can't think of any more engaging multiplayer games than Dominions, really. I'd actually like to ask you about a different game. We're starting to get towards the end of the podcast, but I understand you like Master of Magic, and this is one of my favourite games ever. In fact, I'm playing it on an extraordinaire channel right now with the Caster of Magic mod. Tell us a little bit about Master of Magic. And
I was probably late getting into it. I can't say that I played it growing up or anything. I probably got it like 4 years ago and played around on it some. And I'm not very good at it, as you can tell if you watch my channel, with the Master of Magic games I played. But it's fun. It was kind of interesting. I have a buddy who's been kind of dabbling around with basically working on a Master of Magic game. But anyway, I've been talking with him. And one of the things we kind of talk about a lot is how similar a lot of the mechanics in Dominions are to Masters of Magic. Whereas in Masters of Magic, and even more so than in Dominions,
much more so than in Dominions. It's not a nation, or it's not a game about a nation. Like the nations are kind of transitory. Like you can start with trolls and switch to dark elves and whatever. Your nation doesn't matter that much. It's your wizard that matters a lot. And magic in it is really strong. Like all the high-end units are magic. So much more so than a lot of other games, Masters of Magic has very hard counters. It's not like a unit's like 20% stronger than another unit. It's like you have one unit that can kill, like one of the super high-end units could kill like 20 lower tier units.
Sure.
So I think that for me, because I'm a noob at Master of Magic, I don't really understand it very well. It's like a frustrating thing for me. But that's also one of the things that as you understand the game, it becomes one of the cool parts, is like actually understanding all the counters and the mechanics and the trade-offs. Well, then you start having to make some really interesting decisions. If you don't understand what those are and you just make the wrong decisions, it's just like, oh my God, I'm getting punished so hard. Like in my playthrough, I got just murdered by sprites. Those little flying pixies.
Yeah, you can't hit them unless you've got something to hit, unless you've got archers or something like that.
Right.
Horrible.
And most, like if you look at, I'm trying to think. A lot of the games, so maybe not. I'm trying to think like Age of Wonders, they nerfed that mechanic. Like a lot of the strategy games have made it where flying is less annoying.
Yeah. Age of Wonders is much more sanitized, I think. It's much more balanced in inverted commas than Master of Magic is.
Right. It's much more balanced and much less like hard countery. But, I kind of like the hard countery system, but I think it makes a harder learning slope for the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like you, I didn't play it originally. I missed all of the Simtex games, including Master of Orion first time round, and I came to them again about 4 years ago. I think I've been playing Master of Magic about 4 years, and I played the base game for a bit, and then I jumped straight into Caster of Magic, which is Cerevi's mod, which it makes the game slightly less sandboxy and slightly less hard countery, I guess, and strips out some of the more redundant spells and units that were less useful, and replaces it with stuff that kind of fits the game more. It's changed some game mechanics. It basically makes it a little bit less sandboxy and more of a sort of competitive game, I guess, but the AI is also a lot better. But the reason why I like this game is because it's clearly the root of all of the Fantasy 4X. You can see it in Dominions. You can even see it in Heroes of Might and Magic 3 a little bit. And it was the blueprint for the Age of Wonders games and the Elemental games like Fallen Enchantress. It apparently inspired Fall from Heaven, which is Derek Paxton's mod before he joined Stardock. It was a Civ 4 mod. So it was kind of like the granddaddy of all the Fantasy 4X games, and even now, I still think it's probably the best. I just think that, like you say, there's such a variety in the magic spells, the nations that you can pick, the different schools of magic. Just the way that you can sort of approach the game and go, okay, today I'm going to go with this build. And even I mean, the Age of Wonders games are great, but even they don't really come quite close to Master of Magic for having kind of meme-ish stuff in it. The famous ones like the flying invisible warships. So
right.
Yeah, and so very much like Dominions, there's these kind of crazy things that are really, and if you're not aware of them, and Caster of Magic as well, the AI will use stuff like that against you, which I think is really great, because it will come at you, really early on in the game with like a Hellhound Rush or something, and if you don't know how you're fucked.
Yeah, the Hellhound Rush is pretty intense. It was there probably are some things in Master of Magic that are a little overtuned.
Yeah, I think so.
The 11 book strategies, most of those are pretty garbage. I mean, it's just, but I think that direction, like whether it needs to go to the full extent of Master of Magic with, whether there's some crazy ones. One of them is the Hellhound strat. There's one where you can like literally skelly spam your way to victory. There's another one with what's the top end Death Book one where you get one of those. I think that's the fastest people beat the game on.
I'm currently playing a Death Magic on my Let's Play, and I'm using werewolf spam. So I kind of like just using lycanthropy, and you just kind of turn all your units into werewolves, and that's like, it's kind of like the Hellhound Rush, but Hellhounds, they'll just melt in front of werewolves.
There was some cheese with that too. I can't remember what it was. There's a like a page on the Master of Magic wiki, which is just like broken cheese strats.
Yeah.
And I know there's one for werewolves. I can't remember what it was, but I think one of them was like the high-end death one was like ghouls or something, or not ghouls. It's higher than the Night Stalkers, and it's
Shadow Demons, maybe.
maybe, yeah.
They're the one they can regenerate. Anything that can regenerate in Master of Magic's really nasty. So
Yeah.
Shadow Demons can regenerate, and yeah, there's all sorts of. I mean, I think it's the Skydrake for the. Is that nature or sorcery? I forget which. It might be sorcery, but that unit, even in the base Master of Magic at least, was just ridiculous. Like it's just once you've got a few of those out, they can just one shot even the high end heroes. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I think I like all that. The thing I don't think I like is where you can get a lot of those things at the very beginning. You know, that's like the problem with the 11 book strategy.
Yeah, you should.
I think that probably breaks it a bit. Yeah.
Try Caster of Magic if you've not played it already, because Seraph he's been working on it for literally years. And it's painstaking work as well. Like I think I understand that he never had access to the source code, so he's just completely done it with a hex editor and decompilers and stuff. But anyway, he's all the really broken stuff is gone now. Like he's kind of just made it so that all the fun stuff is still there, but you can't just just win the game right at the start, basically, like you could in the original Master of Magic. But your mileage may vary, and I know at least there's another YouTuber who plays Master of Magic who says he doesn't like Caster of Magic. So I think just some people like it, some people don't. It just depends on what you're after, really.
Yeah, I'll have to pick it back up.
So the other game you play is Eardor Genesis, which is another older game. Is it? You seem to like these older games or games that are very similar to older type games.
Yeah, I suppose so. I think, I'm not sure. I don't know why exactly, but I mean, it could have to do with if you don't, if you spend all your time investing stuff into art assets, you're not investing in other parts of the game. But I think Eardor is fun because it makes you make hard choices, and I think it's one of the better single player experiences for like a 4X game. The whole early part of the part where you're actually having to fight other AIs isn't really great, but the whole part of the game where you're having to figure out how to level your hero, it's a pretty fun puzzle. Because so much of your stuff will like just kill your starting army, and figuring out like a pathway to get like efficient leveling on your hero is actually really interesting and fun. So
I really like the tactical combat in Eardor. That's one I've only actually picked up in the last sort of 6 months, actually. And I own Eardor Imperiums, but it's actually Genesis that I play more.
You do too. How about that?
Yeah, I just think that for a start in Eardor Imperiums, even though it seems more stable on my computer now. I don't know if you've seen this, but if you play through the tutorial, there's a kind of character who pops up halfway through, and he kind of goes, "Hey, yeah, we know about the bug. Sorry about that. If you want a refund, just let us know. We can't fix it."
Oh, I didn't know about that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's like this kind of skeleton character, but it's played with. They kind of play it as a joke, but you know that they're kind of being serious. And I thought that was obviously they had some really, really serious issues during the development of that game, and I feel bad for it. But apparently the one before that was also pretty broken. But Genesis is a good game, and like you, I think that the reason why I kind of gravitate towards older games with crappier graphics, it's the same reason I like roguelikes, is because while they're not spending all this time doing fancy 3D art and spunking all their money in that direction, they can just make more game mechanics, right, and more content. And it was clear to me that Eardor, there's a reason why it's so big in places like Russia, where they kind of appreciate games like that, where they appreciate these kind of more sort of oddball in sort of indie titles that are full of content. The early game's amazing in that game. I've also heard, I haven't really played it a huge amount, but I've also heard what you've just said, which is the PvP kind of aspect of it. The player versus the enemy AI nations isn't quite so good once you get to that part.
Yeah, that part's not very good.
But the actual exploration side, I mean, the fact that you can explore the same province multiple times and find different things in it each time, and there's always something to do in it. It's really cool. It's a nice little game.
Yeah.
The tactical combat's great as well.
And the high-end units in it are really, you have a ton of progression in it, which is possible. Like all your units can level up. Getting the higher tier units is actually really hard. So like every time you find a way to get one, you feel like kind of happy about it. Yeah, so it's got some really, really fun mechanics when you're playing it.
They are actually making another one, I believe. I'm pretty sure I saw on their Eardor Imperium Steam page that they are back working on a new title. So
you know what I hope they do, and I know they're not going to do it, but I hope they just do 2D. I feel like this is my thing. Like not my thing, but this is one of my things. is if you're an indie studio, you don't usually have the budget to do AAA 3D stuff that looks awesome most of the time. I mean, some of them do, but if that's not your thing, if your thing isn't doing really cool 3D graphics, like 2D graphics are probably going to be better.
Totally agree.
Like because a lot of times people make so many mistakes with 3D graphics. Like the units don't stand out from the background, right? Because they're like, oh, we did this 3D model, and we did this 3D model, and now we're rendering them together. And it's like, yeah, but it looks like a hodgepodge of stuff thrown together. Whereas if you're doing 2D, that's almost, I've never seen 2D games where they do that. Like 2D games, they're always like, okay, this is what our background's going to look like. This is what our units are going to look like. And it, like, things make sense. You can actually like read the screen.
2D age is better as well. I mean, there's a whole period of games from, I'd probably say about 1994 to about 2001 that just look shit now. And that's, you can't say the same. Like, look at, I'll use Wizardry as an example, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the Wizardry.
Yeah, Wizardry 8 looks horrible.
Wizardry 8 looks awful, yet Wizardry 7, which came out in 1993, I think, or 94. I mean, it looks amazing still today. The graphics, the hand-drawn graphics are great. They look awesome. Whereas the 3D stuff in Wizardry 8, even though Wizardry 8 is a great game, it just... it looks like a significant downgrade, and that's a real issue, I think. And as you can always make art, 2D art assets. They're a little bit easier to make than 3D.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a good artist too, I feel like a lot of good artist talents get wasted on 3D stuff because it's a lot harder to mesh something well, and it's a lot harder to make a 3D asset look amazing, even if you're a good artist. Like you need to be a good 3D artist, than it is to just do like cool pixel art. Like I can do decent pixel art, and I'm not an artist.
Yeah, right. So it's definitely a less significant kind of time investment as well. Speaking about 2D art assets, what do you think of Star Sector? Because I've noticed that you've been playing that on your channel, and that's a game that I really, really like, and I'm really keen for the development on that to kind of finish, so I can really jump in without it being, knowing that it's probably going to change at some point in the future. How are you finding Star Sector so far? What do you think?
I like it a lot. I've had it for about I think 2 years, but I didn't play it much until recently. And I was like, God, I actually want to play this game. And there's a lot of things I like about it. Like the combat is super satisfying. I mean, it's got like the most satisfying space combat I think I've ever played.
Same. It's absolutely incredible how good it is.
Yeah. The world, the world is alive, but I feel like the world needs a little bit. Have you ever played Space Rangers?
I have. I didn't get far into it, to be honest. It's another one of those sort of obscure, what seems to be to us to be like a kind of weird indie title, but in Russia it was probably quite a big thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's a Russian game, but I think it gets this like living universe even better, because in Space Rangers 2, there's which is similar, like in Star Sector, there's like an AI that's kind of like taking over the Remnant faction, but in Star Sector they're passive. In Space Rangers 2, they're active, and they're like gobbling up systems. So it puts some pressure on the game, and you always feel like you're working against the clock. Star Sector, to me, because I've basically kind of won the game now in vanilla, but it feels like by the time you do most of the things you're supposed to do, then you're in this sandbox mode that doesn't really feel like it has much point, because like they don't put a ton of story assets in. It's like your colony gets attacked by pirates and stuff. The combat in it's still super satisfying, but you like have all the ship designs you want. There doesn't seem to be like a huge point. I think like the like how the world feels, I think they need to do something like Space Ranger, which is just have like the AI gobbling it up, and you're trying to you're making decisions between, do you fund the resistance of the planets? Like the planets are, like the existing powers, like the hegemony, they don't want you to get too strong, but maybe you're funding them to keep them from getting eaten, or I don't know. I feel like I know the modding community is huge for it, and there's tons of cool stuff I haven't explored, but I feel like it's amazing, but it's maybe a little too sandboxy right now.
Yeah, I agree. It perhaps needs a bit of direction, and maybe, like you say, some sort of end game crisis might kind of give it a little bit of, give you a bit of a goal that you can work towards. Because I think sandbox games have, they have that problem, don't they? That after a bit you've kind of seen everything, and unless you're sort of the sort of player who really likes heavily role playing it or whatever, it can especially for people who are really into kind of like learning and mastering game mechanics. I think you can eventually you kind of get a bit bored, but
yeah, but it was awesome. I mean, 2 thumbs up. It's an amazing game. I think, I'm super glad I bought it.
I'd like to see them flesh out the 4X element of it a little bit. I don't know if they will. And I know that they say that it is primarily a space combat game, and everything in it needs to draw the player towards the combat. And I like that aesthetic, even though part of me wishes it was a bit more. I mean, I kind of wanted it to be almost a little bit more like Mountain Blade, in that you could perhaps make profit trading and that kind of thing. But the developers actually wrote a really interesting post basically saying, if we'd have made the trading profitable, people would have just traded their way to all the best stuff, and then they'd have quit saying the game was boring. And I 100% agree, because I see that in 4X games a lot as well. And I don't think a lot of players necessarily understand that. Sometimes more freedom doesn't necessarily mean a better game. And so I think that it's clear that they've got a direction with the way that they want to take it. And there's always modders for everything else. So
yeah, I don't know which direction they want to take it, but I mean, if I had any feedback, it would just be like the sandbox needs to have some pressure on it at the like once you've done most of the things, like the sandbox isn't like once you have your colony set up and it's making money, so you're not really worried about money anymore, which should be the purpose of the colony, probably, that it can make stuff. So that's like a cool thing. But like once you have that, there should be some other purpose. Like we have to keep the galaxy from falling into disrepair, or like the current game loop at the end is pretty boring, where you just are literally constantly being attacked by things. Nothing you can do to stop it, and it's just nonstop, and it's always the same stuff.
Yeah, sure.
But I just want to be careful, because like I'm saying critical things about it, but I love the game. So,
well, Lucid, thank you for your time, and thank you for your videos. They really helped me. Anything you'd like to add before we end this? Promote? You got anything to promote? Any upcoming videos?
Not too much to promote. If you guys ever want to hop in a multiplayer game, let me know, though. I'll set you up.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you, Lucid, for this episode. And we'll speak to you all later.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.